The Indo-Pacific has become a hotbed of great power contestation in the last decade. So, with plurilateral and multilateral mechanisms that configure traditional powers and emergent powers, the region offers an important opportunity to understand the great power politics in the context of rising influence of China and its implications in the Indo-Pacific. Areas of cooperation among stakeholder democracies have become diversified in the region. Power contestation in the region also takes the mantle of non-traditional security sectors, including vaccine diplomacy, as well as newer arenas of traditional security, such as cyber warfare. So to discuss the great power contestation in the Indo-Pacific, we have with us Vice Admiral Girish Luthra. He is a former Commander-in-Chief of Western Naval Command and Southern Naval Command of Indian Navy. A navigation and direction specialist, he has commanded the Indian Navy's Western Fleet and frontline warships, including aircraft carrier INS Virat. He has held key positions heading policy and plans, operations, foreign cooperation, net assessments, and disaster management in the Indian Navy. An alumnus of Defense Services Staff College, India, and Naval War College, USA, he has been Deputy Naval Advisor at High Commission of India, London. So to provide us greater insights on the great power politics in the Indo-Pacific region, I welcome Vice Admiral Girish Luthra to the dais for the lecture.
Good evening to everyone. Let me first thank CPPR and the British High Commission for this opportunity to share some thoughts on this 1.5-day event being conducted by CPPR. Now, for this dinner talk, there are two sort of segments. One relates to the Indo-UK relationship, and the second one relates to the great power competition in the Indo-Pacific, the ongoing great power competition. So first, I will say a few words about India-UK relationship, and then I will move on to the Indo-Pacific and the great power competition there. I have been watching the India-UK relationship quite closely since about 1991. I had the opportunity to serve at the Indian High Commission in Aldwych, London, 1991 to 93. And that was the time when India was going through some very difficult phase from the economic point of view, particularly from foreign exchange point of view. And that is the time the whole liberalization process got initiated. And from that time, I've been observing very closely the relationship between our two countries. I think there is only one word to describe this relationship, and that word is complicated. It is a very complicated relationship. Now, every time we meet at fora like this, people talk about historical connect. People talk about people-to-people contact, having been part of Commonwealth, having been together for many years. But I think it is important to keep in mind that whenever we highlight the importance and the positives of historical connect, we must also keep in mind that wherever you have historical connect, there is also historical baggage. And this particular relationship has been often impacted by the historical baggage, and to some extent it continues to do so. And therefore, in this period, it is not just my assessment, it is the broader assessment that the relationship has underperformed. At least in the last 30 years, this relationship has underperformed for a variety of reasons. I talked about the historical baggage. There are issues related to the world view, the global view, the regional view, how the two countries looked at the broader international scenario, how India looked at China, how India looked at Pakistan, how India looked at Kashmir, how India looked at terrorism was different from how Britain looked at these issues. Then there are issues related to diaspora politics. While we again highlight the importance of so many million people in so many countries, we must also keep in mind that what is at play in that country is also diaspora politics, which again brings in some serious challenges. And it's only in the recent years that we are witnessing a major reorientation in this relationship, last 5 to 6 years, particularly after the integrated review of UK that was undertaken in 2021 and the update that has been done just last week. Now, this morning we were discussing about, there were some sessions where the integrated review, UK's integrated review was discussed to some extent. The roadmap, India-UK roadmap 2030 was also discussed. But I would submit that we need to, from this conference point of view, we need to look at these two as one. Because let's keep in mind that the integrated review came about in 2021, which talked about the tilt to the Indo-Pacific. And as part of this tilt to the Indo-Pacific, a range of areas for cooperation with India were identified in the integrated review. And this integrated review 2-3 months later was followed by the roadmap 2030, which picked up from what was there in the integrated review, built upon it, and developed these specific areas for cooperation between India and the United Kingdom. And these areas, as you know, in the roadmap were in 5 categories of connecting people and countries, of trade and prosperity, on security and defense, on climate and on health. These 5 areas, 5 pillars were identified in this roadmap. And the 6th one was added later, which is collaborating and cooperating on international, regional, and multilateral fora or institutions. This addition happened in 2022 when a review of this roadmap took place in the middle of 2022. Hopefully another review should take place in the near future. Now, under this framework, there are a large number. It is not possible to recite or talk about all the frameworks. There are a number of frameworks, joint working groups, and dialogues that have been established under this roadmap in various areas. And those meetings have started taking place, and the reviews tried and figure out how much progress is being made. What is at present in everybody's sort of observation is the India-UK FTA, which is most keenly watched activity from this roadmap. India-UK, this morning again there was discussion. India-UK trade is at about 30 billion pounds. While we discuss these figures in conferences, we should keep in mind that we need to relate it to how much is the trade with other countries. For UK, India is 11th or 12th trading partner. It's not in the first few. Same is the case with India. I mean, with UAE, we have a trade of over 90 billion. So with UK, 30 billion pounds is not a big trading amount, considering the potential for trade. And that is why the importance of the FTA that comes in. Now, last year, a target of October 22 was announced for implementing or for announcing the FTA, which could not be done for a variety of reasons. As you may recall, last year, it was being said that the FTA will be out by Diwali 2022. It did not happen because there have been many challenges in this particular FTA. Compared to an FTA, we've done a CEPA with UAE, we have done a similar arrangement with Australia, but with UK, some challenges between UK and India, some challenges have been experienced. And what we learn is it relates to various sectors: alcohol, automobiles, providing access to market access to services sector, mobility, legal practice. In India, again, some changes have been done. But the good part is that both sides have not given up, and both sides continue to work on this. Again, this morning a mention was made that as we speak, the 8th round of discussions on the FTA are in progress in a virtual cum physical mode. And at the end of the 7th round, which happened in February, we understand there are 26 chapters of the draft FTA between India and UK. Out of this 26, after all detailed negotiations, 13 chapters have been closed. So 13 chapters have been finalized of the text of the FTA, and balance are in progress. Now, given the experience of not meeting the October 22 deadline, this time both sides are particular not to announce a deadline for the FTA to be announced. But I think realistically it would not be, it would be quite okay to estimate that the FTA should come about in this year, in 2023, by the end of this year itself. On defense and security, a special partnership on defense and international security partnership was announced in 2015 between the two countries. There have been few exercises between India and UK, but the level of the exercises, the level of participation, the complexity of these exercises was not very high. As far as the Navy is concerned, we do an exercise with them, Indra. In between, there was a period when, the exercise takes place when India sends a ship or a few ships to the UK, and the next year UK sends their ships to India for an exercise. So for some time it was observed that whenever it was UK's turn to send ships to India, it would at the last moment get converted to a tabletop exercise, and the ships would not visit. So because UK's presence, naval presence in this area, in the Indian Ocean area, had started becoming very episodic and was not regular at all. After this 2015, and now with this roadmap, new areas, again was mentioned, technology, fighters, jet engines, new areas have been identified. But we have to keep in mind that this again came up today. UK has 7 points of presence in the Indo-Pacific region, in Oman, in Qatar, Bahrain. HMS Jufair was commissioned in Bahrain in 2018, in Kenya, Diego Garcia, Singapore, and in Brunei. There is visible progress of cooperation between the two navies in the Western Indian Ocean. AUKUS was mentioned this morning, which commits the United Kingdom to deploy resources, to make resources available to the Western Pacific region after 3-4 years, and commits them for a very long-term partnership on the other side of the Indo-Pacific. There are plans for a littoral response group to be deployed by the UK, and there have been discussions for UK and France to coordinate their carrier strike group deployments in this area so that they are not present either at the same time, and then you don't have long periods of absence. Similarly, there have been discussions between India and UK to promote cyber-related cooperation, which relates to cyber governance, cyber deterrence, cyber resilience, and cyber capacity building. In all these areas, there is progress being made. There is coordination on international counter ransomware initiative, and what we hear from different sources, these are unconfirmed inputs, that a simulation exercise, a cyber simulation exercise or a cyber deterrence simulation exercise between India, UK and possibly Australia could be on the cards. A Refresh 23 has come a few days back, which mentions the world to be, the world order or the world situation to be in a state of disorder, dangerous and divided. Now these are the three key words of Refresh 23, which is actually a reality in the world around us. The Refresh talks about retaining the tilt strategy, but it also talks about maintaining primary focus on the Euro-Atlantic. Given the war in Ukraine, The focus has to be Euro-Atlantic, but at the same time, the tilt part has been emphasized. So therefore, this balancing will indeed be a challenging requirement. And as has come out in today's conference, earlier also when the 2021 integrated review was announced, many doubts were expressed about UK making resources available. How will these resources come, particularly when the British economy is going through a very difficult phase? Currently, estimations are that if any, in the Eurozone, if any country goes into a recession, the first one will be UK. Those are the estimates that are coming out. And given those pressures, economic pressures, how will these resources be made available for the Indo-Pacific region? How will the narrative and environment be shaped by the United Kingdom, both domestically and outside? How will both countries overcome the historical baggage? And we have seen now last 2-3 days of events. You know, as part of the roadmap, there is another program, Young Fellows Program or Young People's Program, which talks about having 3,000 students from India going to the UK every year for education. Now, what I would like to say is that this is good. So 3,000 students going to UK will achieve good objectives, but look at the damage that can be done by events like the one that we are witnessing now. That damage is much higher than sending 3,000, or even if you were to make that 3,000 figure to 30,000, the advantages of that will be outweighed by the disadvantages of such things happening in public. So therefore, it is important for both countries to see that, one, statements from senior levels, including ministerial level, emerging from both countries, need to be very careful about what they say on this relationship. And on FTA, there have been quite responsible statements from both sides. Off and on, if there is something like this, because there are sensitivities involved on both sides. And as I mentioned earlier, the other challenge will be balancing the Euro-Atlantic priorities with the Indo-Pacific priorities. Now let me talk a little bit about the Indo-Pacific region, which most of us now recognize and everybody writes about it, that it is the area of geopolitical contestation, geopolitical cooperation, and geopolitical rivalry, geopolitical and geoeconomic cooperation, competition, and rivalry at the same time. This morning again, one of the speakers mentioned that the UK is quite very similar to the EU's strategy on the Indo-Pacific, where you are in the same breath, you are a partner, you are a competitor, and a systemic rival, all at the same time. Now, this kind of situation has not existed in the past, and therefore references to Cold War there are many dissimilarities. There was no such thing during the Cold War that Russia was a systemic rival and was a partner also, but there was no such thing, or the Soviet Union at that time. So the situation is very different, but at the same time, we all know that Indo-Pacific is the area where we have 60% of the world's GDP, 66% of the global growth in GDP. And from this 66% of global growth in GDP, this year's World Economic Forum outlook says that 50% of the world's growth, GDP growth, global GDP growth this year, coming year, will be from India and China. Just these two countries will contribute 50% of the global GDP growth. Then there is Indo-Pacific contributes 70% of trade, of global trade. By 2030, it will have 65% of global middle class. So there are pressing reasons for all countries, and since 2017, we have seen when the Indo-Pacific strategies started coming out, more and more countries and groupings have come up with their Indo-Pacific strategies, and the number is growing. In the last 2-3 months, we've had Canada coming out with its Indo-Pacific strategy. We had South Korea announcing its Indo-Pacific strategy, and the IORA also announced the Indo-Pacific outlook in Bangladesh. So while all these strategies have their own peculiar approaches, there are divergences. We must keep in mind that all are not similar. There are areas of divergence, and everybody looks at the Indo-Pacific in their own specific way. But there is one common theme amongst all Indo-Pacific strategies or outlooks or visions, whatever term respective countries have given. And that common theme is China. China is the common theme in all Indo-Pacific strategies. China challenge is the common theme in all Indo-Pacific strategies. That is the commonality, and quite unsurprisingly, China is against the Indo-Pacific concept or Indo-Pacific construct. So is Russia. The initial focus in the Indo-Pacific area or about Indo-Pacific area was maritime. I remember speaking at the Raisina dialogue in 2017, and that time we were all talking about freedom of navigation and things like that, which was the freedom of navigation then got overtaken by rules-based order, and the debate changed. And then we have moved on to now Indo-Pacific construct being a more broad-based, more multidimensional. It is, while maritime issues and maritime security all remain an important pillar, an important theme, but today the discussion has moved beyond and to encompass everything. Quad is one example which covers a whole lot of areas, and initially 3 working groups, and now you have many more working groups covering a range of issues. And here on security issues, I want to also highlight that India's approach, now for example, India-UK partnership in Indo-Pacific, the approach, the AUKUS is an informal military alliance. It's I say informal because it doesn't have a charter as such. But it is a military alliance. And whereas Quad is not a military alliance, and India is not keen to be part of a military alliance, India is promoting what may be called as development-linked cooperative security. That is the thought process through Sagar and everything. That is the thought process being put forward by India. But at the same time, India is not indifferent to discussions with alliance partners on a range of issues where common interests are involved. And so therefore, a number of minilaterals and new arrangements have come up. While we talk about Quad, AUKUS, we also know about the Russia-China partnership. On this side, I2, U2 and other arrangements have also emerged. Now, as far as China is concerned, the rise, aggressiveness, assertiveness has been discussed everywhere. But add to that the fact that party-state capitalism of China has contributed in a big way to the whole geopolitical and geoeconomic debate of the Indo-Pacific. The party-state capitalism of China has blurred the divide between security and economics. Today, we are witnessing an intersectionality of geopolitics and geoeconomics like never before. Now, people aware, linked with the maritime domain, particularly naval officers, former naval officers, know that for navies, for maritime security, trade and commerce is always linked with, hard security or warfare. Even trade warfare is part of warfare. And therefore, geoeconomics and geopolitics have been linked historically. They have existed even from Peloponnesian Wars. But today, it is operating in a very different paradigm. And this intersectionality is also, partly because of the power projection model that is being implemented by China, which uses multiple instruments beyond. It's not power projection only on security and defense. its power projection, which includes trade, investment, diplomacy, technology, all aspects. In security and defense, China has moved 5-6 years ago from A to AD, anti-access area denial strategies, from open seas protection, those were the strategies. It has moved much beyond that. It has done some major defense reforms in China. It has set very clear targets for 2035 and for 2049. The targets have been clearly set out. It has seen rapid increase in its nuclear capabilities. Today, there are 400 nuclear warheads with China, expected to reach 700 by 2025 and maybe 1,000 by 2030. It has increased its maritime orientation. This morning there was some discussion about continental and maritime orientation. Yes, China has increased its continental maritime orientation, but has also not disregarded its BRI is one example, which has both continental elements as well as maritime corridors. It has increased grey zone operations and use of civilian ships for military purposes, and broadly followed a footprint to foothold strategy in the Indo-Pacific region. Of PLA Navy, tomorrow you have a session on maritime security. I'm sure more will be discussed in that. But the growth of PLA Navy has been unprecedented, and no Navy in the last 100 years or so has grown at this pace as has been the case with the PLA Navy, and that rate is being sustained in the next few years at least. Now, Belt and Road Initiative is another example of this convergence or this intersectionality of geopolitics and geoeconomics. The objectives of BRI itself are enmeshed in this web of geopolitics and geoeconomics. Without going into details of the BRI itself, there is only one point I want to make on BRI, that BRI has slowed down a bit because of multiple reasons. COVID contributed, but also because of pushback, because of concerns raised about sovereignty, about concerns raised about lack of transparency, on quality of projects, on debt diplomacy, a series of concerns that emerged from different parts, and the impact of some of the projects in some countries. China made corrections to this, and at each BRI forum also announced how they had reworked the BRI. But BRI did slow down. But while this slowdown in BRI has been witnessed by and has been noted by many countries, but we must keep in mind that BRI has already done enough between 2013 to now, including the COVID period. It was, as you know, it was started in 2013, at that time as OBOR, One Belt, One Road. And it started with simple map, but many branches started getting added as we went forward. And these branches started going out to different regions and different parts of the Indo-Pacific and beyond the Indo-Pacific. But it has already done enough. There was some mention about the port sector in the morning. China has presence on every continent in some port, and China has either management or ownership or control or a combination of these 61 ports on the coasts of Africa. So therefore, these not only, it is not a simple commercial thing, it also has advantages in terms of data and in terms of getting knowledge about the maritime patterns, to build that knowledge base once you are actually involved in so many projects. Now finally, what is the current state of play? There is an all-domain strategic competition in play, the like of which we have not seen before. It is about power, it is about ideology, and it is about governance. We are seeing weaponization of everything. Everything is getting weaponized. We have not seen this before. Entertainment, films, sports are getting weaponized. Mobile apps are weaponized. Media is weaponized. Everything is weaponized today as part of this competition or this strategic competition that is in place. Trade is in a very different situation than what it was 10 years ago. Today, trade is not, or free flow of trade, as we used to call it, free flow of trade was considered a win-win situation for everybody. It is not the case today. We don't consider free flow. There are insecurities arising from trade, and which is leading to trade fragmentation. There are unilateral approaches to trade. There are coercive approaches to trade. There are open and blatant use of tariffs, and security exceptions under the WTO are being frequently used to not do trade where you don't want to do trade. Supply chain efficiency. In the past, you see 10, 15 years, those of you who are linked with the corporate sector, who work in businesses, recognize that the focus was on supply chain efficiency. Today, the focus is on supply chain security. This is a big transition that has happened in the last 10 years. Because then supply chain efficiency for making more profits came from first in, first out, all those principles of logistics, etc. So those are gone. Today it is supply chain security, which is more important than supply chain efficiency. So trade is being viewed not from economic perspective, it is being viewed more from geostrategic perspective. That is the competition or the great power competition that we are witnessing. Same is the case with defense competition. And again, countries which had pacifist leanings in the past as a result of Second World War, both Germany and Japan have stepped up their defense expenditure. UK is also planning to step up defense expenditure, but very slowly. They've announced 2.25% of their GDP to be going into defense. Technology competition, tech competition is something I want to make a mention of because it's a very important point about this great power competition. And we are witnessing a strong technology competition in all areas. This morning mention of AI was made, but there are many areas where this technology competition, whether it's quantum computing, cloud computing, biotechnology, hypersonic weapons, the competition is really growing. And the example of this competition, there are many examples, but US Science and Chips Act is a clear example of this competition, which is meant to stunt the growth of the chip industry in China. Let us also not forget that China's chip imports are at about $400 billion, which is more than China's oil imports. And so therefore today, suddenly there is this discussion of setting up chip factories, chip design, everything in chip. So on chips, there are alliance frameworks on one side, and on the other side, you have decoupling and containment. Chips is one example, but the same thing could be said about other areas. And the last thing that is playing out is the sanctions. While the war is on, economic sanctions are playing as much a role as the military operations themselves. So there are three things in play in Russia-Ukraine war: the war itself, that is military operations, the economic sanctions, and the military aid. These three aspects are at play, and the economic sanctions are a big piece. The future of economic sanctions is a matter of concern for many countries, particularly the global south, and this is also going to shape the new strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. So this is the state of play. How does it look going ahead? Looking ahead, as the UK's refresh has captured, it is very uncertain, very, very dangerous situation that is developing around us. I think we don't have to wait till 2047 or 2049 as was being discussed. There will be a new world around us by 2030 itself. We will be in a very different world by 2030. It is too early to signal the arrival of multipolarity, but there is a movement in that direction. We don't know what will happen to multilateralism and to multilateral institutions, what kind of reforms will take place. But yes, other than the great power competition, middle powers will also play a major role in the coming few years. So with this, I will stop here. Thank you very much for your patience.
On behalf of CPPR and British High Commission New Delhi, thank you, sir, for joining us and for that amazing conversation. I request Mr. P.K. Hormis Tarikan, sir, advisor to CPPR, to come forward to present a token of appreciation to Vice Admiral Girish Luthra.